My guest today is Todd Graff at Frank Family Vineyards in Napa Valley, one of my absolute favorite Napa Valley properties. And Todd is very much boots on the ground there. You're a little bit of everything from vineyard to winery, which is how we like it, right? Family owned, family run. I would like to hear a little bit about you as a background as a winemaker, where you came from, a little bit about your history, whatever you would like to share.
Pretty simple for me. I grew up in Sonoma County, so I just assumed if I was going to make wine, I'd be in Sonoma County. Ended up going to University of California at Davis, which is arguably one of the better winemaking schools in the English-speaking world. And first job was offered when I graduated was at Joseph Phelps in Napa. So I came to Napa, and I've been here ever since.
And a true native, which is probably rare.
I didn't get very far, but I've been fortunate that I've been able to travel around the world with wine. So started at Phelps, then I took off, packed the backpack, and did vintages around the world for a year. Came back, and then Stag's Leap hired me as their assistant winemaker. And in about 3 years, I started getting Wanderlust again, and then Schramsberg at the time was starting a joint venture in Portugal, and either I was lucky enough or dumb enough to raise my hand, and they selected me to go to Portugal to start a winery. So for 5 years, I did the flying winemaker gig, back and forth, and making wines in California, making wines in Portugal. I came back to Napa, and I started and focused on sparkling wines for a long time. And then the writing was on the wall that if you're going to be in Napa, you better make cab. And the Frank family opportunity came. And so I've been here 18 years.
Oh, that's awesome. And you have so many beautiful Cabernet selections available to you at Frank family through the vineyards that you're working with. Winston Hill, Rutherford.
What makes Frank family interesting, fun, and dynamic and smart, I think, is that we focus on varietal regions. So Carneros for the Chard, the Pinot, Rutherford for the Cabernet, Childs Valley for Zinfandel. So we really try to get site-specific with the varietal.
There's always a thread of elegance, and maybe that comes from making sparkling wine where you can't really overdo things because that happens naturally with long aging. But I find, for example, your Zinfandel is, to me, like if you want to show someone what Zin can be like from California without just knocking them over, it's such an elegant, almost on the lighter end of the spectrum wine. And they're great representations of Carneros and Pinot, and Cabernet, of course, is king with what you guys do.
No, I think you hit it on the head. The sparkling background is very detail-oriented winemaking and very delicate winemaking, and a little bit goes a long way. And I think that kind of laid a groundwork for my winemaking of a little bit can go a long way, and balance being the key point. If you have really great fruit, you can throw more oak, for example, on it and not notice it. But if you don't have great fruit, you actually have to pull way back. And we're lucky that we do have great vineyards, so I can build on. They have strong shoulders, I guess, so I can put a lot of weight on their shoulders, and it'll still be balanced. It won't break their knees.
The first Frank family wine I had was Chardonnay and Cabernet, the kind of like benchmark cornerstone of what you guys do. It's really a beautiful representation of the region. But I do think that since we're talking about bubbles a little bit, that is the Blanc de Blanc and the Rosé that you make sparkling there are phenomenal for like non-champagne, but there's so much of that style and finesse and elegance that I just appreciate deeply. Do you have a love for making sparkling wine?
It is. It's a pet project because, again, my formative years as a career were sparkling based. Schramsberg, of course, and then the old Coteau New Napa, which is Artesa now. So I tried to be an expert as much as I could be. Traveled to Champagne semi-regularly. So it's a hobby. It's passionate. I probably have a bottle more time almost every evening of something. So I try a lot. And ours is great. You know, everything's minimum 3 years, yeast aging, Carneros fruit, the Blanc de Blanc's all from our vineyard. And we're trying to be that grower producer version in California. So we're not making a lot. The majority sold here in the taste room. A little does leak out in the wholesale market. in special restaurants and retailers. But everything's given the time, and with sparkling, you kind of hit it earlier where the time means a lot.
Should we start with Chardonnay though, as we talk about the still wines? That's of course the place to begin. You go Carneros, you've got the nice cool climate. It's just home for Chard.
So we very fortunate. Rich and Leslie have 80 acres down in Carneros. So our foundation is our own vineyard, and it happens to be our best fruit. We also make a reserve Chardonnay that is from there also. So the same vineyard, the reserve Chardonnay is 100% from that vineyard, Lewis Vineyard, where the Carneros blend is the foundation is that, and we use other growers also. Some of the great growers right next door, the Beckstoffer family is right next door, great grapes. The San Giacomo family on the Sonoma side. So we're a little different, not different, but we use both sides of Carneros. Well, it's Napa and Sonoma. And we're a French oak house in all our wines. So the Chardonnay's barrel fermented in 100% French oak. And for the Carneros blend, every year it's a third new every vintage. Where the reserve Chard, a little different, it's 100% new every vintage. A little bigger, a little stronger. But the knolls we pick from for that blend, again, very good, strong fruit that can carry the oak and you can't see it, which is one of the fun things about making that wine.
Sure. So you're getting some of those cooler pockets where you get really great acid, and then you get some of that really like sun-drenched, delicious fat fruit that you can create a beautiful, balanced, stunning wine.
So what's fun, and when you bring up the acid, a lot of people don't realize, everybody talks about sugar levels and bricks. These are some winemaking parameters. But for our vineyard in Carneros, we're usually picking on acid, trying to have the balance of the acid come in to where it's ready. Because we know it's going to be ripe enough sugar-wise. We're not worried about that. We're trying to get the acid in balance more. So we're usually looking at that number more than the sugar numbers.
And given the oak regimen, which is super luxurious, you really require that acid to make sure that everything comes out in balance so it doesn't get overwhelmed, right? Because you want it.
Very true. And we use malolactic fermentation as a tool to balance that acidity and add richness to the wine. To use it, we're not really looking for the buttery characters of the wine. We really want the luscious mouthfeel coming from the malolactic fermentation. We do have, for both Chardonnay and Pinot, some mom and pop growers in there that I love working with. It's the coolest part of Napa, and it's the U that kind of connects Napa with Sonoma. You come down Napa and then swing back in through to Sonoma, and Carneros is that bottom part that connects the two valleys. And Pinot Noir, it's kind of the new kid on the block for us. I think our first vintage for the Carneros blend was 08, so that's the new kid.
The Pinot is like really something that can be appreciated by the Cabernet drinker.
Yeah, and we're really trying to. I mean, we make a lot of wines, and what we have going for us, they're all from different regions in Napa, and we try to keep the typicity. We want our Pinot to taste like Pinot. We want the Zin to, and it's an older school style. It tastes like Zin actually, and then the Cab to be pure Cabernet style. So we're not trying to have them intermingle at all. So I think that's what we do really well.
Well, and since we're talking about the Zin, it's like you said, the Zin actually tastes like Zin. I wonder if the average consumer, maybe even myself included, do we even know what Zin tastes like?
That's funny because in California, a lot of the great old vineyards were interplanted. So we had Zinfandel plus other varietals and Petit Sirah, Mourvedre, certain things that were in there. And Zinfandel is not a dark grape. When you just take it itself and crush it, it's not very dark. It gets that really, really dark color from other varietals. And we do use a splash of Petit Sirah on ours.
Sure.
We try to know where, if I can see that I'm putting the Petit Sirah, I back off a little bit because I really want the Zin. We're not trying to get the 16 to 17% alcohol wine. We really want it to be a classic Zinfandel and maybe more old school where it isn't the biggest and the darkest of the group, but it's still got great raspberry, cinnamon, little spice, and these pretty scarlet colors.
Yeah, I love it. I remember being so just honestly pleasantly surprised by it the first time I had it and seeing it. in the light and just the beautiful color that it gives, but it's a very beautiful wine. And again, speaking of the acid, that structural component is so imbalanced with the fruit and the alcohol.
And Childs Valley and Capel Valley, so kind of spread out. And the Childs and Capel are kind of great opportunities for Zinfandel as the Napa Valley proper becomes more Cabernet-centric. You find great Zin in these outer-lying sub-appellations.
So often we see old vine Zin, I think more than other varieties, that like on the label people tend to call out old vine Zin. From a, like, why do you think that's so important, and why is that so often like referenced? I know it has to do with the way the grapes are going to behave during the winemaking process, but
yeah, so theoretically it's a great idea. I always refer a lot of time to vines and wines like people, and you get an older person who's got a lot of character or learned a lot of life lessons. Those are great, but I was just explaining this to my son last week, I think. And he asked the same question, why is it better? I go, well, sometimes it can, just like old people can be better. But heck, if a guy was a jerk in his 20s, chances are he's a jerk in his 80s too. So
probably worse jerk.
Yeah. So it's not always the way. So it's not a guarantee that it's an old, there's a reason you replant, because vines get old, they get sick, they aren't productive. So ideally, if you found an old vine, it's because it was in good shape, it had great character, and it's still going. So ideally, that's the case. But with newer plantings and newer clones, better rootstocks, you can make some improvements too. So it's kind of a rule of thumb that it's going to have some great old character, but not always the case. And then with, as you know, old vine isn't a legal term by any means. So
like what makes it old vines? It could be 10 years old.
Somebody's old vine could be a 25-year-old vineyard, and somebody else's could be a 50-year-old vineyard, and somebody else's could be 100. And you hear stories, well, those vines are older than these, so those are our older vines. And so there's no really rule. So it's more of a marketing thing. And so if you have a great older vine, great, take advantage of it, and that'll add some spice and character.
We have to go to Cabernet Sauvignon, because that is to me, that is just synonymous with Frank family. You honestly do it best. We have there's so many beautiful wines coming to Colorado out of Napa Valley, and I turn people to that. My dad's a huge fanatic. Everybody that we introduce it to just loves it. And so you have the Napa Valley, and then there's a couple of reserve tiers.
Great. So, and again, we talk about cliches that it all starts in the vineyard. It is pretty true. We have great farming teams. We have the Winston Hill Vineyard. It's as Rich's flagship vineyard where Rich and Leslie live. It's the first vineyard he bought in Rutherford on a rocky slope in the center of Rutherford. And then across the creek is Benjamin Vineyard, Rutherford Valley floor. Then we have S&J Vineyard up in Capel, which is on the eastern flank of Atlas Peak, so a little more high elevation there. So that's our foundation of Cab. And then it gets into partners again on picking the neighborhood. And we've really focused on Rutherford, which is arguably one of the better Cabernet growing grounds in California for sure, and then Napa Valley. Quarry Vineyards, Red Barn Vineyards, Beckstoffer's, again, a big player for us in the Cabernet world. And again, some mom and pops. And the Napa Valley is true that. The Napa Valley blend starts at the north end of Napa Town all the way to Calistoga. So it takes up the whole valley pretty much. A little Merlot in that blend from northern Napa, a great little Merlot vineyard. We grow a little Petit Verdot and a little Cabernet Franc, so that finds its way into the blend too, but it's still Cabernet focused. And then we get more narrow from the big Napa Valley, which is our biggest blend. We come into Rutherford and a Rutherford Reserve, so that's 100% from Rutherford. A little more Cabernet centric even. It's closer to 95% every vintage of Cabernet. And it's a blend of our two vineyards, Winston Hill, Benjamin, and then some Beckstoffer George III there. And again, mainly Cabernet Sauvignon. And then we go up in the world and we get more vineyard designate. Winston Hill, our flagship vineyard, we have a red blend out of that. And then we go block specific with Patriarch, our 100% Cabernet blend named after Rich's father is from 2 blocks in the center of the vineyard. So it goes valley, appellation, vineyard, block. That's how we kind of do it.
So I've heard the expression Rutherford Dust.
Yes.
Will you explain that a little bit for us? Because you would know.
I think this is one of those things. It's hard to explain. You know it when you see it, but it's kind of that. It's a good marketing term. There's a little chalkiness in the wines. It was coined by Andrei Telechev back in the. It took some Rutherford Dust to make good wine. And I take it, Larry, good Rutherford Dust on your shoes, so you know you've been out in the vineyard if your boots are dirty. So, and that helps a lot. Walking vineyards.
I mean, you guys are open. You're doing it just reservations only, and make sure you know what you're doing and schedule it.
Yeah, that's it. Reservations only, so that's different. It's all outdoor seating. So today the weather's perfect, and as long as the weather's great, it'll be a fantastic experience. And we're lucky in California that now until the end of October, we're going to have fantastic weather. But we have the umbrellas out. We're very lucky. We have lots of space. So when they allowed us to open, we started outside. And then when they closed indoor dining and tastings, we were outside anyway.
We're already outside, yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Todd. I'm so grateful to you. I know that everyone here in Colorado just loves your wine so much, and getting a chance to interact with you, even if it's just on the screen, we'll take it for now. And as we keep rolling, we'll continue to wave the flag and share Frank family with everyone out here.
Well, I appreciate your time, and thanks for being a great partner.
Certainly a pleasure.